All right, well, we will get our meeting started of our Charter Review Committee. Please say present when I announce you. Terry,
Present.
Chris O'Neill,
Present.
Brian O'Hare,
Present.
Steve Mello,
Present.
Mary Waite.
She's muted.
She's muted. We're gonna say she said present and we will move on. Sean McGinnis is here, Anthony is here, Melanie is here, and I'll introduce everyone to Jeff Nutting. So those of you that tuned in to the charter
Form of government.
meet overview that was held by MMA, you would have seen Jeff as one of the panelists. And as you recall in our last meeting, I said that I offered to meet with Jeff, with Sean and Anthony about coming to tell us a little bit more about the direction we need to go, what we can do. So Jeff is here to kind of point us down the road. Welcome, Jeff.
Oh, well, thank you very much. First of all, congratulations to all of you. Very difficult task trying to figure out what's in the community's best interest as you look forward over the next 10 years. And while you're looking back, charters are tough because you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but have to figure out as the world changes and as your community changes, what changes may or may not be appropriate for you. The good news is you might hear from me and a lot of other people, but ultimately, you know your community better than anybody. So those decisions will fall to you. So I was asked along with a couple of administrators to make presentations to the Select Boards Association. We have a form of government committee that goes and speaks to communities across the Commonwealth as they go through charters or special act reviews to talk about their experiences and trends in local government and just a question and answer what may or may not work depending on your situation. And so we did a quick hour-long presentation. One member was from a town with an open town meeting. One person was from a representative town meeting. And my experience was mostly in a city form of government. Just a little background. I started in local government in 1976. I've chaired a finance committee, a select board, a school committee, and lots of other committees. Been a consultant for over 100 communities, done interim management 15 times for communities across the Commonwealth, and was a town administrator 27 years in two different communities, president of the Mass Municipal Association. So all that tells you is I've been around a long time. I've seen changing trends in local government and been in a wide variety of roles, so I get to see all sides of the coin. A couple of trends that are happening as the world goes faster and faster and faster. Chilean treasury collectors are now more than ever appointed. You start to slowly see that in clerks because the world of elections is getting more and more difficult and trying to attract one. And so it's more of a trickle, but it's a slow transition, and not in little towns for sure. To appointed, you see some of those things. In my tenure, obviously the role of the town administrators, who used to be called executive secretaries or administrative assistants, have been dramatically strengthened over the years to more and more strong town administrator or town manager forms as things have become more complicated. The other thing, discussions, but I see very little evidence of, it happened to me personally, trying to attract people to run for office. Hey, I'm more than willing to be on the Board of Health, but I don't want to take out papers. I don't want to fill out forms. So, those are the discussions that are happening as fewer and fewer people want to participate in local government, and there are a lot of barriers, and, is that a barrier that should be removed? So it's one that gets discussed. I can't give you any specific outcomes to that, but, you think that someone on the Board of Health, I'm just using that as an example. Are you better off appointing people that are in the public health field or letting people run? I mean, that's your decision, but you see that discussions taking place on a case-by-case basis across the Commonwealth. My experience after spending 25 years in a select board, open town meeting, form of government in various communities, in 2001, I went to Franklin as the town administrator and retired in 2019. Franklin in 1978, with a population of under 18,000, voted to change their form of government to a city. So the town of Franklin has actually been a city for 44 years. They elect 9 councilors, and then they hire the town administrator to be the chief executive officer to run the town on a day-to-day basis. And the elected officials take all the big votes on important matters, zoning, bylaws, budgets, et cetera, basically replacing the town meeting in many aspects. What I really loved about the government is 2 things. One, and similar to my previous job, the town administrator is in charge of the day-to-day operation, hires all the employees, manages them, sets, townwide standards for performance and evaluation, gets responses. One person's in charge of the organization. Yes, you have boards and committees and commissions, but on a who meet, bi-weekly or monthly, but on a day-to-day basis, the buck stops at the town administrator when things need to get done or problems need to get solved. And so it's a very efficient business-like approach to government. The board of directors, i.e. the council, hires the administrator hires all the employees, the administrator, some of those are ratified by the council. The administrator appoints all the multi-member boards ratified by the council, does, a wide range of things that the select board used to do, and that is then handled on a day-to-day basis. And again, the council reserves its time for the community-wide, big issues. They set goals every year, and it was my job to try to carry those out. The other great aspect of the government is they basically have a town meeting every 2 weeks. The council is the legislative body. So as issues arise and this world goes faster and faster, they're able to respond. They don't have to wait 9 months for the annual town meeting or a fall special town meeting. The state cuts the local aid, we balance the budget in a month. We give tax incremental financing to people who want to bring manufacturing to town. That takes a month. The council, doesn't have to go to town meeting, doesn't have to wait. We'll make a deal, bring it to the council, and 150 jobs show up. When medical marijuana came in, that voters overwhelmingly supported it. In 75 or 90 days, we had a zoning overlay district and brought in a giant company. So the ability to react in a much more timely fashion, and the ability to have a more goal-oriented process, where if the council wants to talk about a zoning change in an area and they ask the staff to research it and have the planning board have a public hearing, et cetera, in the long run, it's probably going to get adopted, because they wouldn't have started the conversation if they didn't want to at least have something move forward. So I always called it the yes, no, let's go government. The council says yes, they say no, and we move on. There's no long delay. And all the public processes are still built into the system with public hearings and 1 or 2 readings. And, we're a community of about 33,000. We're not Fall River, New Bedford, or all these big cities that have, everything's about politics and wheeling and dealing. It's like, how are we going to make the town government better? And so, that's what I spoke a little bit about it at the statewide seminar, that I became a convert from town meeting. And it is a big change to one that is more in line with the fast pace in the world that we use today. So I am happy to answer any questions about general local government trends, or how small cities work. Amherst just became a city, Palmer, East Longmeadow. So there's a trickle of communities are at least looking at that alternative. You have to have 12,000 folks to become a city in the Commonwealth. And you probably know this, or maybe you don't. The numbers might be off 1 or 2%, but about 94% of local governments in the country have council forms of government. Only town meeting is left in New England. And I think communities are slowly transitioning, or at least having some of that, not little places, obviously, but it doesn't make sense for our citizens, because that's what your government's for, to consider that. And that's a big step. So thank you.
Mr. Heidi, may I ask a question?
Yes, Brian, go ahead.
Mr. Nutting, thank you very much. Appreciate it. What was in your experience, what was the impetus to switching from a town meeting to, in Franklin particularly, I guess? Was there a single event that made?
There was actually a couple. I lived next door in Medway when that happened. But talking to people that were around, there was two things. They struggled with quorums, and with 495 having opened up, they saw a lot of potential development, and I think they wanted to be able to react in a more timely fashion. So the original form had actually precinct and at large councilors, and it was tied to population, and the council got up as big as 15 and was heading for 17, and we had a revision to put it back to 9, because 17 people is too unwieldy to get anything done. So it was really those two factors. I mean, it only passed by a dozen votes back then, but huge change if you think about it. Back then, Barnstable, Watertown, Southbridge, there were a handful of communities in the 70s that made that transition for various reasons. But now I see, since then, Bridgewater, Randolph, the communities I mentioned, there's been more transition to at least consider, like, those folks made the full switch. But
So I'm hearing that at least at Franklin, it was lack of quorums showing up, or was it?
Yeah, they had an open town meeting back then.
Okay, all right.
And I worked in Stoneham for 9 years as a town administrator. They had zero quorum because first night of town meeting, 200, second night 42. Especially if they were long, and at least you have an RTM. I mean, open town meetings, you can stuff the meeting, and those kind of things. Special interest take over, but I did notice you have a very large RTM compared to communities across the Commonwealth, and that's up to you. But communities your size are about 240 or 50 of the 32 communities that are out there these days. But so
the issue for us is that we do it by precincts, or
well, that's how RTM.
And we have one of them is university based.
Oh, okay.
People I get the impression people are not too interested in town, but I don't know for sure. Anyway, and then some of these other towns, is it quorum issues, or is it lack of interest, or not being able to make decisions quickly?
I don't know, like in East Long Meadow, Palmer did it 10 or 12 years. Palmer's a town of 20,000. East Long, these are smaller communities in the big scheme of things. And, sometimes, as charters are created because controversy or something's not working right. Other times people just want to look, if you think of Amherst with UMass and, a very complicated community. I think they just started the process and ended up, their debate was mayor or manager council. They had RTM, and I don't know all the details behind the consideration, to be honest with you. But the world becomes more complicated, as you know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Terry.
I'm interested. So were you the administrator right after this happened, or were you?
No, I went 2001 to 2019. They'd have.
So it had been in effect for like 20 years anyway before you came in.
That's correct. And I said I was. I lived
So I'm
next
curious
door.
about what would have struck if it was a 12. You said it was a 12 vote decision to become a.
Yeah, I mean, it went to the ballot. And it was a
Yeah.
very close vote.
That's amazing. And it lasted. I mean, with a split like that, you would think somebody would come out and try to make it go the other way.
You know, I think after a few years, there was discussion about that, but it's never been an issue for the last 37, you know, that, you know, people just accepted it. And, you know, I think, you know, you see, I mean, you have a representative town meeting, but you see less people run for office, less people show up for town meeting. If you get a 20% turnout at a local election, you declare victory. You know, and I started long enough ago that local elections really were contested. You didn't have one person running for assessor or, you know, a blank slate and you had to do a write-in. And so I think that Franklin was just a little ahead of the curve, and you know, some of those issues that trying to get folks to stay involved. And I bet, like you, everybody's been on 4 different committees. I mean, you know, because you can't get new people. It's very frustrating.
So, do you know, this is Brian again, along these lines, how do you run into towns that, or do you know of towns that have a really effective select board in terms of holding various committees and multiple member bodies to task of why they're appointed? I mean, do you reach a point like we're roughly, I guess, 35,000 people now?
Okay.
So it sounds like, I don't know, you said 33,000, I believe, in Franklin.
Correct.
Do they reach a critical mass where under the town? Do they reach a critical mass under the town meeting method? Where it becomes untenable, or?
Well, I don't think, you know, Brookline, I spent a year working in Brookline. There's 60,000 people. They have a RTM with like 250 people. So there's still communities out there. Arlington, you know, you still have communities with 50, 60,000 people that still have town meeting form of government. And, you know, Arlington and Brookline is a good example. In Brookline, the town administrator has literally no authority, and in Arlington has a great deal of authority on the day-to-day basis. So the roadmap is all over the place still, as far as city, town meeting. I will say that, you know, in communities that have lots of boards and, you know, so we have a planning board, like you have a planning board, but the planner, the community development department works for the town administrator. The Board of Health person works for the town. Everybody in Franklin works on a day-to-day basis. They certainly report to the conservation, the zoning board, whomever they work for. But as you know, they only meet once or twice a month, and on a day-to-day basis, having a central authority just makes for more efficiency and makes for the greater ability. So the number one goal of my department heads was customer service, every single one of them. You know, because who do we work for? We work for the citizens. And when you work in towns where, geez, you got a DPW board and you got the rec department and you got all these people elected and no one, everybody reports to somebody else. How do you have consistency across an organization? And I think and whether you have a town manager and a select board and a town meeting, or you have a city, in this day and age, to me, that's the key component. Whether you know, because, you know, no one in some of these places, there's nobody in charge really on a day-to-day basis. You know, and you know, you had the same government for 200 years. I do a lot of workshops for select board on goal setting. In fact, I'm doing one in Danvers next week. I've done 4 or 5 this year. I've been doing it for 30 years. And trying to explain to boards, hey, what's your most important job? What are your annual goals? What are your 5-year goals? You're a big giant corporate. You spend I don't know what your budget is, probably well over $100 million, right? Wouldn't it be nice to have a game plan? Where you're going and how you're getting there? And you don't get to do everything, but it would be nice for the citizens to understand that the chief elected officials are looking ahead over the next 5 to 10 years and want to, you know, drive the community in this direction, or at least attempt that.
Is there an interim step where a town administrator, or I don't know if that's the right term, as far as they've defined, where a town administrator would be in charge of fully all the departments because they're appointed.
Well, even so, yeah, I mean, call it a town administrator, call it town management. Titles are titles, okay? It's really what your charter or your home rule, petition gives the power and authority to the person that is hired by the board. So, in a lot of places, if you're the hiring authority and you're the person that sets people, I mean, other than collective bargaining agreement, hey, I'm hiring the town accountant and here's your salary and whatever. The accountability is just there on a day-to-day basis. So,
Jeff, I'm going to interrupt for 1 second because I'm going downhill fast. We've talked at the charter meeting before about, we need to finish our charter.
right.
There's also another committee that hasn't even begun because we couldn't even get anyone to
Bylaw Review
serve.
Committee,
The what?
the Bylaw Review Committee.
Okay,
And after those are done, we do think that there has to be a government study committee.
okay.
But our goal right now is charter.
To update the charter.
Okay, yes,
Okay.
and I'm going downhill fast.
So I
So-
mean, one of the things, I don't know if you, there's places like the Collins Center and the other places that will, can assist in that process that you're talking about. They'll gather a lot, they're not gonna tell you how to vote, but hey, here's what other communities do, here's successes. Here's might work, and you have to make those decisions in the best, because every charter is a political decision as well. You have to weigh what the citizens will accept from the current status quo.
Mary?
Can I just, yeah, I was just curious, as we go through this conversation, are you seeing trending within, town meeting models, whether they be representative or open, that those communities are starting to take some of their boards and make them appointed? Because that is the challenge. And you alluded to this earlier, and I'm wondering, are you seeing that trending, that is, because we're in the, again, we have plenty of good people, I'm sure, like you said, as an example, would like to be on the Board of Health, but don't want to go through the headache of necessarily like running. So is that trending? Like,
That's a very slow trend.
okay,
And it's community by community, and it's board, different
right.
communities have different boards that discussions get held on. So there's no universal or widespread change, but those are discussions that are at least taking place.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's because we have a consideration on that for sure. I mean, obviously, I'm school committee, so that's a completely different entity, but with some of our other boards, we're thinking about that, so.
Jeff, I wanted to ask if you've been involved in working with any communities that have made this kind of transition recently, like North Attleboro did this maybe a few years ago, right? They transitioned from town meeting to council.
Yeah, I spoke to the Amherst Charter Commission.
Okay,
I've spoken before Framingham converted. I spoke to them twice when they were going through the process.
okay.
They ended up with a mayor. There's 70,000 people with a council.
So they must have had an elected, charter commission, right?
Yes, correct. Right. So they both had that. So you can either do that, as you know, you can go through a study committee with a special act.
Okay,
Yeah, either way. So when we've amended our charter, we went through the special act because it was, we were making minor changes, et cetera. And then it goes back to the citizens for a ballot question.
okay.
So Jeff, in your experience, working with municipalities to make charter changes, whether, major ones like we're talking about, or even just like significant ones, like, the committee here has discussed changing a number of committees from elected to appointed.
Right.
And if they want to present that to town, what have you seen done successfully to present those changes? And what have you seen to not be so successful, from the committee standpoint, the town select board standpoint, to promote these changes to town meeting? How can they be successful? And
Well, they're not going to be successful unless you have extreme outreach to the citizens, to the town meeting, RTM, to the community at large, to give everybody a voice in the process. and you have to present a rationale for, why do you say this board should now be appointed? Have you looked at not counting COVID, but have you looked at elections for the last 10 years and, there's only one person running, or, no one ran, or so, or people have said they want to be involved, but they don't want to run. So, I mean, it's nice to have a good idea, but you have to have a reasonable argument behind those, and you have to get that out so people have a chance to absorb that. No one likes surprises. Change in Massachusetts local government, I think, is against the law. No. So it's a lot of work to get that information out and make an argument, and then ultimately, in your case, the RTM is going to say yay or nay, and then it would go to the legislature and then back to the ballot. So I think, working with the RTM, maybe you make a presentation at one meeting and you say, hey, we're thinking about this, and 6 months later you put it up there officially or something. But yep.
Well, it's interesting, one of the issues we have is, in most communities is just people on a whole are just disinterested until something happens, and then they're like, oh, well, I didn't know about this. And we talk about doing workshops to present some of the changes that the committee here is proposing. Generally, the people that show up at the workshops are the people that are elected or on a board or committee. So when they look to make a change, they're like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I'm on multiple committees, it's great, and I'm involved. And so it's really trying to reach the rest of the public, and even our town meeting reps, reaching them. I mean, they're really, a lot are disengaged, even prior to town meeting. So, I mean, I don't know if there's an answer, but I think
I have a question.
You still have to go through the process.
Mr. Nutty.
Yes.
Brian again. What would be an examples of extreme outreach you mentioned? Outlet, did you say?
All social media opportunities you have, public hearings, notices to senior centers and other places of gathering, to allow people to look at, Sean's right. 12 people going to come that don't have a vested interest? No. Did they have an opportunity to be heard? CC to all the RTM members, so they know what's going on. They can zoom in or show up. So, I mean, you have to pull out all of the stops to, and when people say, I didn't complain, well, we had 3 public meetings. We had this has been on our webpage for 6 months. The select board have talked about it at their meeting, yada, yada, yada. There's got to be agenda items. And certainly if you're talking about boards that you're going to change, they're going to have a vested, interest, and and the issue is not about them. Well, I'm doing a good job. Why should you appoint me? It's about the future of the community, because you are not going to be on that board forever. And so it can't be a point. You can't point people and say you're not doing a good job, because they're doing a good job. But what's the future in 8 years when you're not around and we're trying to get somebody to be on the XYZ board? So you have to have an all-out effort, and a lot of people won't show up, but there's no other alternative in my view.
And the importance of a rationale, pro and con for the changes, I guess, defaults to whatever group is making the suggestions to town meeting. So this group, if we were interested, would have to write the rationale and somebody would get at the town meeting. And that would include people who no longer, I'd say, who don't support the changes. So you'd have to have a pro and a con, and then leave it at the town meeting to make the change. I think that's what I'm hearing. Don't let me put words in your mouth.
No, you're right. You know what? It's fair. Hey, we've been doing it this way. We've had good people. So I think you have to have a caveat, and then you have to make your argument, because what you think is in the best interest of the citizens. And then you might have to bring out examples of other communities that might have done this or are now doing it or have been doing it. The battles that took place about appointing a treasurer collector over the years were staggering. So, you go back 30 years and, Mr. Smith he's a nice guy, and he's got elected treasurer, and now he's collecting, investing, and distributing $80 million, but he doesn't have any background. And over the years, people go, that's crazy. So now those discussions are starting to trickle down to, because of It's very hard to get qualified people, whether they're appointed or employees. Paid wages have gone up. So the discussions are happening. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah. And I would imagine a place like Brookline, who still has a town meeting, probably has a very engaged political base.
That's an understatement.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to make sure, because that's my impression of
I mean, the
Brookline.
town meetings are 4 or 5 nights, they're 4 hours, still talk, I mean, it's unbelievable. I was in the town clerk's office for a year during COVID, to run all the elections, and I had to go to the town meetings, and I don't even live there, and I was pulling my hair out. So anyway.
Okay.
Mr. Nutter, Chris O'Neill from the Planning Board, appointed to the Charter Review Committee. Just a couple of things. When you say to try and get buy-in from the citizens to work on some of these committees or boards, do you have any examples of certain communities that have done a really, really good job of getting buy-in from the citizens versus just putting things on social media? Or one of the things that I had sent to Sean a while back was this idea of the state of a town or state of the city.
Right.
I know that New Bedford obviously is a much bigger example, but they have an annual state of the city, and it brings in stakeholders from, development through nonprofits, all the individuals that make up that particular area,
Right.
whether citizens or not. I'm just trying to figure out whether you have examples so we can
So I would,
market to them.
so I think the best person to speak about that is Julie Jacobson from Auburn. They have a very, very active outreach program. They have citizens academies where they bring people in. I would get her on a Zoom. She was one of the speakers when we did the statewide webinar. And she's been there became the town manager when they transitioned from a town administrator form of government. And I think she's done a fantastic job, and I think she'd be better suited to answer that question.
So, Mr. Nutting, what town was that? I know I remember I saw it.
Auburn,
Auburn?
up next to Worcester, all right.
How big is that one? That can't be very big. 50?
20,000 maybe, I'm guessing.
I know Easton has a Citizens Academy that they offer. how
Yeah,
to-
so that's the same thing, but they also have, she's done a fantastic job up there with social media and trying to get people to participate, and they have an RTM as well. So I think it'd be worth.
To the best of your knowledge, has Ms. Jacobson, I guess we could ask her directly, has she had success in drumming up more interest from town meeting and having people attend?
They have an RTM, so I'm not sure.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, so they have a, just like you do, so I'm not sure.
Okay, she did want to ask. Thank you.
Yeah.
Even with our representative town meeting, though, we have many, many openings on,
That's typical.
and that's a data, you can see that in the data. I think the anecdotes about, people attending, people not attending, when you ask the moderator, she said there hasn't been a problem with the quorum, finding a quorum.
Yeah, well, that's, again.
So, but I do think that we would like to have more people involved because it's sporadic. There's some information on Facebook, there's little information over here, there's little, we don't receive regular communication as town meeting members at all, just for the town meeting. So that's an area that we could improve in for sure.
So you could be sitting in any community in the Commonwealth and make that statement.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's,
Yeah.
the trends are what they are across the Commonwealth about
Yeah.
participation in local government.
Yeah.
You see it, you have a presidential election, you get 80-90% turnout, and you have a local election, if there's no controversy, 15-20%.
Yeah.
If you're lucky, sometimes less, sometimes there's no contested seats. The world's changed from, when all these towns were small and everybody lived there and no one moved, and there was a book by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone, written, and he studied the entire 20th century and showed that public participation in all forms of clubs and government, everything has been dropping steadily since 1964. That was the peak year of participation in life in America. And
Yeah.
it hasn't changed.
Jeff, in your opinion, do you think it would be more prudent for us to look at this kind of from the rear to the front? Meaning, if we have a particular elected board that we're having trouble with,
Right.
which is we're having more trouble with this particular, say, the Board of Health, for an example.
Pick it up.
I don't even know if this is true or not,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I'm just using it
Okay.
as an example. The Board of Health, traditionally, we're having trouble getting people to actually run for that type of position. Do we focus on that first in trying to get this transfer done from
Yeah, I mean,
elected to appointed?
There's no rush. I mean,
Yeah.
you've been around for 200 and something years. I mean, it would be nice to ask the Board of Health, look at, what do you think about if we started this transition, and, that way, we can get, hey, you're good members. We're going to appoint you, but I mean, I'd go talk to them.
Right. Right.
And have those conversations. And it's hard when you're sitting in the seat to say, well, why are you picking on me?
Yeah, that was the first thing that I had
not
here.
picking
Was
on
how
you,
about
we're
going to
looking-
the boards themselves and start there, and then find, like if I'm thinking of this as if I go to the Board of Health and I've got say 5-member board, and I can only get to 3, most of the time, those 3 people are overburdened. So you've got a better chance of them saying, you know what, yeah, maybe we should try the appointed. And
Let me tell you, but if you're gonna go to the Board of Health.
Yeah.
And you don't go to the other boards, they're gonna
Right.
look like you're picking on them.
Right.
So you have to have the conversation with everybody. Why are you just picking on us? What about the XYZ board?
Yeah.
So you have to treat everybody equally. And then, if one committee is more open to the discussion and they're willing to support that, at the town meeting, that's a lot different than showing up and, what's wrong with us? And you're trying to control the world and you're gonna tell us what to do,
Yeah. What about one of the issues that I had originally when this concept came up was starting to form a revolving door for the select board. If they don't like a particular appointment as, say, chair of the Board of Health or planning board or whatever it is, have you seen in your experience, a problem when we get a certain faction on a select board that wants to force an agenda? I'm just worried about starting to form some type of revolving door with the chairman of these committees and boards. I don't know if you've seen that.
Well, I mean, once you're appointed, it's very hard to remove somebody unless you have a bylaw that specifically outlines the reason you can remove someone from a board.
Mhm.
2, once the board is formed, they decide who's going to run the meeting. 3, most appointments, I mean, other than the planning board, as you know, are 3 years. So you'd have to have a long-term game plan to play games. And certainly, other than everybody's elected for 3 years except the planning board generally. So, I've never really seen that. They might not like an individual because of something else.
Right.
But, if you have do you have a 5-person select board?
Yes.
So, I mean, you got to convince 3 people that somebody doesn't deserve reappointment in a public meeting, and for what reason? So could it be attempted? Absolutely. I don't see a lot of success.
Yeah, we've
But I
got
think,
we've got the process for the elected boards for removal, but we've got to look at the process for appointed members.
Right. And so again, unless you have a bylaw, I mean, if someone commits a crime, but if someone makes bad decisions or doesn't do something, guess what? They're human. Unless you specifically, they don't come to the meeting or they move out of town, the typical things,
Mhm.
not because you don't like the way the ZBA voted on a special permit somewhere. There's no reason to remove somebody.
No, Jeff, and to Chris's point, I agree. When you have more appointments, the select board, they set their goals for the community, and people vote them in with those goals in mind. So they need to share those goals with people they appoint, and I imagine they would expect them to be in line with the goals as a whole broadly. So I think that's where it's.
So one of the beauties of where I worked is the town administrator was the appointing authority of all multi-member boards had to be ratified by the elected officials. But it's a lot hard. So, we'd have someone apply, they would interview in front of the board they wanted to be in, they'd interview with me, we do all this, background, and then one name goes to the council. Well, it's a lot harder to usurp politically to usurp the appointment of the town administrator if you have an agenda, because it's already been vetted, and ultimately we're going to vote against the ratification. In 18 years, they did one, and I knew they were going to do it. But so, I mean, that's an alternative. That's a huge change, but it takes the politics out of the process.
Yeah, good point.
That was my experience.
So what you're saying then is the appointing authority for the boards would have to have goals that the boards would be striving to achieve, and that might be reason to I don't know what the word, I'm going to say unappoint, that's not the right word.
Well,
People
even,
perhaps.
but think about it. The assessors, 98% of what they do is a statutory requirement. Zoning board, obviously, you have to, do what's within your zoning bylaws, and, can they stretch that a little? Yeah, but you got a 20-day appeal period, right? So a lot of your boards are statutorily constrained as to what their roles and responsibilities. Conservation Commission, for example, is supposed to follow the, wetlands protection. If you have advisory committees, they're advisory. So they don't necessarily have a statutory authority. So it's not a biggest concern. I mean, I don't know if you have CPA, if you do, they have lots of money. Those could be controversial, but those ultimately have to be voted on. So there's a lot of checks and balances in the system to make sure people, but it's nice to appoint people that have passion, that will show up, will listen with an open mind, and hopefully do what's in the, there's going to be disagreement. That's fine. That's why there's a board. So I think, getting the right people on the board those boards is 98% of the work. Whether you agree with any individual, I don't know how many times they disagreed with a zoning decision, but okay, what am I going to do about it? Nothing. Move on. Not everybody gets their way all the time.
I see. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Jeff, this has been great. We met with the committee here has met with Mike Ward from the Collins Center too.
Oh, okay.
Support, and you echoed a lot of what he said as well. So I think, it's good for us to kind of hear this is the direction, of the future and where communities are going. I think as a group, I'm speaking for the group, and if, I think they struggle with a lot of what you're talking about. How do we get from point A to point B? Do we need to go from point A to point B? Do we transition slowly? I think they've discussed some changes in, does the town have the appetite? How do we present that to the town? There's a lot of factors, and, a lot of times people don't see how things are being done or how the sausage is being made. So they don't think it needs to change at all. But when you're inside, you're like, oh, we need to be a lot more efficient to move forward, and it's hard.
So there's no crisis. So incremental change is not necessarily a bad thing. If you say, hey, we're going to change these 4 things, you don't have to go from A to Z, and you still have good folks serving your community, but maybe there's a better way if you look ahead on this area, that area, and this area, and ultimately, the committee makes the final recommendation.
Yeah, ultimately, I mean, we're all in it for the town and to make
Right.
sure that things are most efficient and effective. But so my first inclination is to say to Sean, let's look at the boards that you're having the most difficulty with, trying to get this centralized administration together. Let's take out the worst part of it for you and really drill down on those, focus on those, and maybe we present those, talk to those boards or positions, get some buy-in, explain the process and why you're having trouble with it, and then present those. And I think our level of success will go up in trying to get them implemented.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
No, thanks again, Jeff. This was
I
great.
have a question.
Oh.
What haven't we touched on, do you think we should know about in this process? Can you think of anything?
No, I mean, I think you're wrestling with the same thing every charter commission wrestles with. What's the right thing for your community? What changes will have the greatest impact that are politically viable? I mean, again, charters are compromised between where you might want to be and how you're going to get there. And so, so few people are engaged. It's hard to convince people that we need to make some of these changes because it's in your interest. It's got nothing to do with you, the charter committee, or the government. It's what the citizens will benefit from. And so if you go to appoint a committee, hey, we're going to have higher qualified people on the XYZ committee versus, I've been elected, age and residency were my qualifications, right? I mean, and most of the time it works, but sometimes it's a disaster. Whereas you have a little more control on key, no one thinks anything about appointing a zoning board of conservation and some of these other things, but suddenly you say, oh, I want to appoint a board of health. Oh, what are you doing? Well, what's the difference? In this day and age? So.
Terry?
Before you go, I just wanted to say that I enjoyed the DLS presentation that you gave, and I very much appreciate your service and your willingness to help this committee. You have a lot of good experience, and it's very helpful to hear about it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I wish you guys luck. I'll wait for the end result.
I'm sure we'll be in touch before then.
Thank you.
All right, everybody have a happy holiday.
Yes,
you,
thank
Neville.
you as
Thanks.
well.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, so Heidi is almost down and out. She texted me, so I don't know if the committee wants to move forward with the review or just wait until the next meeting. I don't know who, anyone wants to.
I think we should wait. I mean, we kind of, she directs it and, we
I
only
agree,
have
Mary.
about a half hour.
Yeah, if we need a motion to push, then I'll make that motion to.
And I'll second.
All right, I guess I guess your motion would be to adjourn then, so you might want to
Yes.
make.
Motion to adjourn.
Hey, before we
Well,
do that,
second.
Yeah,
when's our next meeting? Because I have 2 trials on Wednesdays in in December.
I think this was gonna be the last meeting until January.
Okay, 'cause
And
I
I
have
think
trials on the 7th and the 14th.
I show a scheduled meeting on the December 7th at 11. That's on my calendar. Doesn't mean it's right, but
No, mine does show.
Oh, the
And
7th?
and Heidi said we have to vote to reappoint. Is that a vote that we do? Is that?
No, the select board. So I'll put that on for the 12th, their meeting. I don't have
I have a
this.
trial right now on the 7th, but I'm trying to move it. So if you want to keep it open, we can keep it open and wait and see. Because in January, I've got 4 trials and I'm just gonna be swamped. So let me see if I can move it before we move the meeting. Do you have it? You don't have it on the 7th?
I had the 7th at 11.
If you all have it, that's great. I don't, but all right, I'll touch base with Heidi on that, and then we'll get it posted by the end of the week, and then should be good. Okay.
Thank you.
Chris made a motion to adjourn. Someone needs to second it.
I seconded it before a second.
All right, Terry,
Yes.
Chris,
yes.
Steve,
yes.
Ryan,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
and we don't need Heidi. She's there, but okay. Have a good rest of the day.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.